Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Queer Coping Together. Today we're going to focus on gaming for healthy social interaction and community building. My name is Brennan Jordan. I use he, him, and his pronouns. I'm the Assistant Director of the Behavioral Health Department at Mazzoni Center. Aside from that, I'm completely and unapologetically a huge geek and into most aspects of geek culture. For those unfamiliar with the term geek culture, it essentially means the communities of people who are really into things like fantasy, sci-fi, anime, gaming culture, and plenty of other things. You could probably tell that I'm a bit of a gamer by these awesome headphones that I'm using to record this. Some of the work that I do outside of my role at Mazzoni Center is centered around utilizing board games, particularly role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder in a therapeutic setting. Today I want to talk a little bit about how folks can use gaming during this very difficult time as both a healthy coping skill and a way to build community. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the inherent therapeutic benefits of playing role-playing games, how I personally use them during this time, and give you folks some recommendations for some of my personal favorites as far as games and platforms in which you can connect to people online. If you're someone who's already fairly familiar with role-playing games and various gaming communities, hopefully you'll get a better idea at how you can use your own personal games to help you cope with the hardships you're facing and grow as a person. If you're someone completely unfamiliar with role-playing games and the board gaming community, I'm hoping that this will be a nice little introduction and possibly spark an interest for you. So in general, engaging in regular healthy social activities, building and utilizing good support systems are one of the foundations for maintaining good mental health. This was the case before we all started quarantining, and it didn't stop just because quarantines made it substantially difficult or impossible for most of us to socialize the ways that we're typically used to. Now, while I think video games in moderation are a great pastime, there's just something really special about getting together in person and sitting around a table with friends to play a board game or, any role-playing game. It's certainly been a regular practice of mine for years as a way to make new friends, and has certainly served to make sure that I have scheduled days to get together with members of my support system. Make it part of a routine instead of just something that I'm doing on the fly or, whenever the mood hits me. When quarantine happened, I had to take my gaming online. I'll talk a little bit about that and ways that you can use the various games to either start gaming for the first time or pick back up with your friends that you haven't been able to spend time with in person. I want to talk a little bit about what is a role-playing game. I want to talk about that in general. Now, some of you may have heard about role-playing games, but don't really know what they are, and some of you may know them inside and out. You may eat, sleep, and breathe them like I do. I just want to take a few minutes to discuss the basics for folks who may be unfamiliar. In a nutshell, role-playing games are collaborative storytelling games that generally tend to be a bit more open-ended than a traditional board game or, say, video games. The generic concept is players create their own personal character, and throughout the course of the game, while either sitting around a table with friends or, now, via some sort of video chat program, either act in character or describe the various actions that their characters take while going on some kind of adventure. The adventure is set up by the person running the game, commonly referred to as the game master. You may have seen or heard there's usually a lot of dice involved where when you say that your character is going to do something, there's some element of chance. So you'll usually have to roll some type of die to determine whether that thing that you did was a success or not. And then you go from there and you continue adding on to the story. Now, the most popular role-playing games that most people are either familiar with or have at least heard of are Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder. Now, these are great games, Dungeons & Dragons being my personal favorite, but there are countless different types of role-playing games for folks who are looking for a different genre or flavor. Now, if you've never given any role-playing games a shot and feel a bit skeptical if you'd actually enjoy them or not, All I can say is, you know what, just give it a try. If you don't like it, you don't have to keep doing it, but you may find that it's something that you really enjoy and adds a lot to your life. I wanted to address a few reasons why I think some folks steer clear of role-playing games. One common reason that many folks who might have had a slight interest but have decided to stay away or holding off is kind of the stereotype that role-playing games are those games that are just played by a bunch of cis straight white guys and that the game itself isn't going to provide an inclusive or safe space. Well, that certainly may have been the case in the past, but the landscape has been changed significantly, especially since the most recent edition, the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, was released in 2014. That edition really took great strides to embrace diverse gender identities, sexual orientations, and put more characters into their pre-written adventures that include a much greater representation of women and people of color. But aside from D&D, nowadays it would be nearly impossible to go to any large gaming convention like PAX Unplugged that happens every year in Philly, or any of the others without seeing a really significant representation of the LGBTQ plus community in not only the groups of gamers, but also in game developers. PGN actually published a really great article about all of this, which I will link in the info. Definitely suggest reading. Aside from that, in Philly here, when things are back up and running and open, I'm aware that Redcap's Corner in West Philly and Amalgam Comics and Coffeehouse in Fishtown both host pretty regular LGBTQ plus role-playing game groups. Just something to keep in mind. Now, another one of the reasons why a lot of folks steer clear, for folks my age or older, you may remember a time us gamers called the Satanic Panic regarding Dungeons & Dragons. So for anybody that doesn't know, back in the 80s, various conservative and religious groups around the country began trying to spread the idea that playing games like Dungeons & Dragons was a gateway to demon worship, or saying that it would cause players to have a loss of grasp on reality. All in all, that it was just an unhealthy thing. There's actually even a hilariously awfully made-for-TV movie featuring Tom Hanks in one of his very first roles called Mazes and Monsters. If you're a D&D fan and you haven't heard of it and want a good laugh, highly recommend it. Thankfully, though, over the years, and especially I'd say within the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a growing pool of research that's shown that not only were all of those myths completely unfounded, but that playing these types of games can have an overall beneficial impact on players' mental health. Now, I could make a video that goes on for an hour or more explaining all the reasons why I think playing role-playing games are therapeutic and beneficial. We don't really have the time for that today, but I'd like to just give a few examples. When you create a character and through gameplay start to really developing who they are as a person, it's not uncommon for the player to both combine aspects of who they are in real life along with personal characteristics or traits that they either wish they possessed or would like to improve upon. Playing this out through a role-playing game can be extremely helpful and therapeutic, as it gives the player the chance to try out some of these skills in a setting that's a safe space, so long as the game master is doing a good job to create the safe space for the players. Sometimes this is a conscious choice for players going into the game, but often it happens unconsciously. Either way, there's a strong chance that it's going to give a great therapeutic benefit to the players. Now, while role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder tend to skew towards fantasy, in the vein of, say, Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter type stories, not everyone's into that sort of thing. Fortunately, there are countless types of role-playing games that exist within various genres. There are sci-fi role-playing games that exist within the Star Wars and Star Trek universes. There are gothic horror games like Vampire the Masquerade. Aside from the D&D group that I'm in regularly, I've been playing a weekly Kids on Bikes game with some other therapists around the country. Kids on Bikes is essentially like Stranger Things, the role-playing game. And it's been one of the most fun times I've ever had playing role-playing games with anyone. I'd really recommend giving Kids on Bikes a shot if you haven't. One of the nice things about that is it's also a lot less rules heavy than some of the other role-playing games, so it doesn't take as long to learn. So next, I'm going to move on to some of my recommendations for how you can play some of these games along with other board games online while you're stuck at home and connect to some of your friends and some of your support system.
So, when I first started quarantining, the feelings of isolation were exacerbated by thinking that I wasn't going to get to keep meeting with my weekly Dungeons and Dragons group. Thankfully, not long after, we took our group online using Roll20. That's what you're looking at here. Roll20 is a great platform that provides tools for the game master to show the game map on screen. It allows players to move around visual representations of their characters. It provides a virtual dice roller, which I like. You can actually see the dice roll on screen. It also provides an in-game video chat system, so you don't need to use any other programs. When playing using Roll20, you can see all of the other players. You can see them, you can hear them, along with playing the game. Now, another great thing about Roll20, for folks who aren't part of a group but who may be interested in finding a group to play with, they can search for groups that are looking for new players. Many groups on Roll20 will make it a point to state in their information that they are LGBTQ plus inclusive. Just one thing to note, Roll20 isn't just used for Dungeons & Dragons, it's used for just about every role-playing game under the sun. So if you're not really into fantasy and maybe more into a game from another genre, they're pretty much set up for everything. One last thing about role-playing games, there are countless YouTube videos available that will teach you the basics of most role-playing games. Many of them also have their basic rules online available for free. Most of them do take a little bit of time spent learning the rules before you can jump right in, but I'd say it's definitely worth it. Now, if you aren't feeling like you have the time or interest to invest in learning the rules of role-playing games, but still think you'd be interested in playing board games or card games with friends, I'm going to recommend a few other resources. Now, when playing all the games I'm going to recommend, you can easily create a video chat using whatever program you prefer while playing. That way it feels more like you're playing the game in person with friends. I'm going to be posting links to all the games that I recommend in the info. So I'll start with the most simple. PlayingCards.io provides a simple but useful engine for a standard deck of 52 playing cards. You can create a room and send the link to your friends, and from there you can play any card game requiring a standard deck of 52. Anytime cards are moved around by anyone within the room, everyone will see it. You can have your hand, so you can keep cards to yourself. And then you can recall and shuffle as needed. It is fairly simple. The site also provides some customized decks and other decks for certain types of card games that require a different deck setup than the standard 52. Now, if you like card games but want something a little bit more complicated, I want to recommend one of my absolute favorites. This game is called Dominion. It's a simple deck builder game where you gain resources to purchase cards, essentially in order to purchase cards that are victory points to get the most before the game ends. On the website, the basic game is free to play. You can create a username and a friends list so that you can create and join your friends' games. There are also lists of random games that you can join as well. Now, this next one, while I've played a ton of this in person, I have not done it online yet, but a friend of me recommended a great website where you can play Settlers of Catan online. Settlers of Catan is a very popular and fun board game where the primary goal is to build and expand your kingdom by gathering various resources, building roads, building cities, all while trying to build a better kingdom than your opponents. This is a really great game for folks who are familiar with kind of the traditional standard games, Monopoly, Clue, and want to branch out a little bit without getting into a game that is too super complicated or rules heavy. I definitely enjoy this one, and would recommend giving it a go. Now, there are certainly way more great board games that you can play online for free than I have enough time to talk about in this video. So I'm also going to post a link to a few websites where you can find extensive lists and links of games. Board Game Arena is a great one. Tabletopia is another. And, you may find some new games that you never heard of that become new favorites, or you may find some that you didn't think you'd be able to play online for free. So highly recommend taking a look at that. The last recommendation I want to make is a different kind of game. Jackbox games have really become very popular throughout quarantine. They're a wide variety of mini games that can involve trivia, creativity, social deduction, and plenty of other aspects. The host of the game creates a room for their friends to join. Their friends go to the main website jackbox.tv either on the browser on their computer or on a cellular device. From there, they can play the game with all of their friends in the room, and they'll play it on either their phone or the browser that they're using on computer. Now, these are not free. They have to be purchased, and they can be purchased, the mini games, individually or as packs. But they only need to be purchased by the person who is hosting. So once someone buys one of the packs or buys some of the games, they can host as many games as they want. Everyone that they have joins, doesn't have to spend a cent. I can attest that these are really a lot of fun. And even more so than Settlers of Catan, these are great for folks who don't necessarily want to spend a whole lot of time learning a lot of rules and going through that. And that ends my recommendations.
All in all, it doesn't really matter if you play the games that I've recommended or any that you find on your own. The important thing is to find new and interesting ways to engage in healthy social interactions while we're cooped up in quarantine. If you're finding that phone calls and video chats with friends and family aren't feeling fun and rejuvenating, or maybe you're not having them at all, scheduling times to play games together can be a great way to break up the routine. Have some fun and feel more connected with the important people in your lives. For folks who have never really given role-playing games or board games a chance, I hope this video inspires you to give it a shot. For folks who do or have regularly gamed, I hope this provides you with some new resources and maybe inspiration to keep going with your hobby, even though things are substantially different now. Lastly, I hope everyone out there is staying safe and healthy. Thank you for watching this video. Good luck and have fun.